Well, thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to be up here with you this morning and have this opportunity to converse about leadership. And we're going to jump right in and talk about gender. So there's a lot of discussion about gender in leadership. It's kind of been at the forefront of discussions and debates about leadership in the last couple of years. Can you talk about, as a woman in leadership, what do you think are unique opportunities you have, and what are some of the challenges you face?
That's a big opening question. Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning. Let me start with that. Thanks for having me. Before I dive into some deep stuff, it's a pleasure to be here. It's fun to be back at Trinity. Oh boy, that's big. So this morning, as I was driving here, I said this to Mackenzie a few minutes ago. I was listening to NPR, big NPR fan, and I was listening this morning, and they had a researcher on there talking about women in leadership, actually, and gender and how that plays a role. And I was all excited because I was like, yes, that's exactly right, as I was driving here. I think it's a perpetual question that we're going to be asked because there are gender differences that are just at play in our world. But I also think that there's probably a lot of opportunities that I've had because I've been a woman, and then there's probably been some challenges or barriers because of that. I think, all you can do is work with what you're given. So in this case, I'm a female, and so I have to kind of play to that, and I have to work with that. I think the biggest challenge for me has not, and I think this is true of a lot of other women's experiences too. I don't think it's so much that it's men hold women back as much as women hold each other back as well too. I think we're our own worst enemies sometimes in that way, and probably that's true for men as well. I think we could look at a lot of different nuances between genders and how that plays a role in how we lead, or our characteristics, or our tendencies, and what that makes us do. But I think all of us, male or female, have really amazing potential as leaders, and it's not so much about being a good woman leader or a good male leader as it is about just being a good leader, and living into that potential and being authentic to yourself in that way. And I think that's really where we should spend our energy and time focusing, as opposed to getting too caught up into these nuances. That said, there's certainly been challenges that I've encountered. I've encountered interesting comments and discrimination along the way at different moments, and I think those can be really frustrating to deal with, but I think as opposed to getting really caught up in that, there's a lot more that we can do and be successful at if we just focus on moving beyond that characteristic and conversation, and really more about how do we each individually reach our potential and our capacity that we have to be really amazing leaders and to do good in this world. And that looks different for each of us because we come with a different set of gifts and personality characteristics and a different set of opportunities in your life at a different place. And so your life is going to look really different than the next person's, and you are going to have different leadership opportunities than your colleague or your classmate is. And it's about living into that potential and living up to that challenge.
Right. You mentioned, women maybe are our own worst critics.
Yes.
And I know you've read Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In and follow other women leaders closely. Why do you think women scrutinize one another so much? What's behind that?
I don't know, but it's really horrible, isn't it? Like I know we've had conversations about this. It's a challenge. And I'm sure, I think men do it as well, but I'll talk about my experience, which is from the female experience of being a woman leader and just a female in the world. My sense is that it's probably we're all just trying to figure it out. And it's really easy to get competitive or to try to put yourself in a position where you feel like, well, my choices must be the right choices, and so I need to support those. And so consciously or subconsciously, then we shame other people in their choices as well because we want to support our own and the way we've gone. And as opposed to this philosophy or different worldview of that everybody's path is going to look different. And the way you choose to lead or the choices you make in your life might be different than mine. And I don't need to try to shame you for your choices to support my own. But I think we do that a lot. There's a real sense of vulnerability anytime we put ourselves out there in the world. So anytime you take on a leadership position, you put yourself in this really vulnerable spot, right? Because people can criticize you. People are going to say they don't like the way you do things. You can get a lot of praise and accolades, And you can also get a lot of criticism and challenges that come with that. It's a very vulnerable thing. And so just putting yourself out in any work situation allows you to have other people giving you feedback about the work that you're doing. And I think that can be scary and challenging and feel very vulnerable. And so it's easy to try to support ourselves by putting somebody else down in there. And so I think women can be really brutal sometimes towards other women's choices. And that gets into the whole, debate and conversation around family life and work life and how that meshes. And but the reality is, we live in a society that's really different today than it was at any other time in history, obviously. And women have been working and leading since the beginning of time. It maybe has evolved and looked different over that time, but in whatever context you're in, we're all working and doing something with our lives. And so I kind of feel like some of the noise around the types of jobs that women do or the way that they choose to put their skills at play is really just noise, because really we've been using our gifts and working in some capacity in or out of the home in some context since the beginning of time.
You mentioned vulnerability, and we've titled this talk, "The Courage to Lead into Your Call." Certainly, I would assume you've experienced times of vulnerability and fear. Can you talk about how you've worked through those and had the courage to move into some pretty successful positions?
Yeah, it's a very vulnerable thing. I mean, think about anytime you put yourself out there, right? Leadership is that context, is saying, I'll step up and move into this role where I won't just try to fade in with everybody else, or I won't try to just stay below the radar, or just do what I have to get by. But leadership is when you step up for a moment in some context and say, I see something that needs to be changed and I'll do it. Or I see something that needs to be organized, or there's a problem and I can see a solution and I can do something about that. Those are really, I think, divine moments when you're given this opportunity to step into that and to make some sort of amazing change, but that requires putting yourself out there, because it could fail and you could look really silly, or you could get a lot of criticism for it, because people can, anytime somebody else isn't doing it, it's easy to criticize, right? Like, it's easy to say, well, I would have done it differently, or I would have done it better. It wouldn't have failed if I would have, been in charge of that. I mean, that's a natural tendency for all of us, right? Is to look at somebody else and be like, well, I can do it better. And the truth is, let's be honest, there's a lot of things I couldn't do better. And there's a lot of things that people probably could do about my job a lot better in moments. But it's the courage to step up, because if we don't do that, if we don't put ourselves out there and allow ourselves to be vulnerable in those ways, we never are going to accomplish the great things that can happen. I really wish that instead of all of the fighting that we do with each other around things and the criticizing, we would just support each other. Because think about what amazing things would happen in the world if we had this supportive environment where we were really about trying to help each person live into their full potential. If everyone in your network and in your family and your friend group, you were trying to help them live into your full potential, as opposed to thinking, well, I could do that better, or I hope they don't get that opportunity and I get it instead, or even our colleagues in the workplace. If we really wanted to fully support each other, think about the amazing things that would happen, because we wouldn't be so caught up in our own fear. We would feel like we have some courage to step up, and we'd feel like there was a place to do that and there was support for that. And so I feel like those are the kinds of environments we should try to be fostering with each other. But it also means that we have to be a model for that too, and step up and say, I'm not going to be caught up in the fear that surrounds it. I feel fear every day. Pretty much from the minute I wake up in the morning, I feel like, oh boy, okay, what do I have today? And can I do this? And I constantly have thoughts like that. I think that's human, to be like, boy, that's big. That feels bigger than me in some way, especially when you're doing work in a ministry context, or you're doing work with people's deepest needs in ways that can feel like work that's tremendously bigger than you, and like you can't possibly have all the solutions for that. And those are leadership challenges that I don't know how you navigate through unless you have a really deep sense of core of knowing who you are and of trusting that you have God and a higher power at work helping you to work through those and to give you guidance and find wisdom in that. I think it would be really hard to be a leader without having a sense of faith and a journey around that, because prayer is one of the main ways I get through that, which is praying for wisdom and trying to do the best I can do, and then trust that God's going to use my offering of service in some way to carry out the work that he needs to accomplish.
Your identity as a leader, I mean, you've talked about what your faith means to you and what it means to be a female leader. How did that identity form? Can you point back to some times in your life where you felt like, I'm becoming a leader, or I am a leader, and really lived into that?
Yeah. Well, my mother says that I organize the stuffed animals from an early age. I think there's just a natural tendency. So I don't actually always believe that leaders have to be born, not made. I think you can be, you can become, anybody can become a leader. But I think I have always had this natural organizing tendency to be there's chaos here. We can find order in this. We can do something more with this. And so there's probably just a personality trait there that is part of that. And I certainly probably have some personal characteristics that tend me more towards that. I'm fairly extroverted, and I do like to see things in order. I like to see things come to their full potential. And so it's really hard for me to sit on my hands if I think that something could get better or could be more. It's really hard for me just to let that go by status quo. So part of my life journey has been about figuring out what do I invest in to make changes on, and what is okay just to stay put. So I think it's been an evolving process over time. Leadership is probably not something I thought about much until my adult life, when I found myself more in those positions, and because I also am constantly on this learning journey in life of figuring out how do I get better at what I do, that I realized there was some really good benefits to me studying leadership, and I became really just interested in it as a topic as well. If I'm going to be in those positions, what does that mean, and how can I get better at leadership, and what does that look like? And so, part of my educational journey then became about studying that, because I'm really fascinated about leadership, and I'm really fascinated about leadership in nonprofit organizations, which is the context in which I work today. So I think I've learned a lot from some of the formal study, but some of my best learning about myself has come from conversations that I've had with other great leaders, or watching other people lead, and mentors, and it's that personal reflection that's probably helped me, I think, to become better at my work, and really aware of my blind spots and my failures too, of where I have lots of room to grow as well.
Yeah. How do you get to a place with a mentor where you say, what do I need to work on? How does that feel when you're doing that as a leader?
Yeah. Scary, because who wants to be told they're not very good at something? Spend most of my day trying to do things well, and it's really again a vulnerable spot to put ourselves in there and to say okay, I know that there's some blind spots that I have here, because we want to go through life thinking we're awesome, we're perfect, or we've got this nailed and nobody could do it better, because we want to feel that way. It feels good for your ego. And the reality is, though, we never push ourselves to accomplish more if we don't address the things that are holding us back. And so I think mentors are one of the best things that you can do, is to find people in your life that can speak into it, that you trust, that can give you good advice. I've been really blessed to have a couple really great mentors, and who are people who I trust explicitly, who have great credibility, who I feel like I watch them and learn so much from them, but also who I trust to speak into my life, to say when I ask a question about, what do you think about this, or how do I need to do better about that, I really trust their responses, because I know it comes from a place of love as well, of, this is where you've got a blind spot, or I think you need to grow in this, or, this is where you're going to need to go next in order to get better. And so that's really helpful, because I can try to be really personally reflective, but there's always going to be things that you miss. And often I'm going so fast in my day of trying to get things accomplished that I don't always have that time to spend really, sitting around thinking about these things. And so attention to it is really helpful. So I think, nobody asked me for my piece of advice here, but my one piece of advice would be to get a really good mentor, or multiple, because I think you need lots of them throughout your life, and at different stages in your career. And it's people who will help you to grow just in incredible ways through that.
Yeah. So you've alluded to this process of discerning, and I know we could talk through your kind of career trajectory, but serving as interim executive director at Cabrini Green Legal Aid, then shifting to Donors Forum as a vice president, and now as CEO and president of New Moms. Certainly there were opportunities that you said no to along that journey. How did you discern that these were the places God was calling you and other places that he wasn't calling you for that particular time?
Well, the problem is I have trouble saying no, so I will admit that up front. I'm really bad. I've gotten better at it, but I'm not good at saying no, because my career plan, which is probably not one to, I don't know, nobody ever gave this to me, but my career plan has always been really this faith-filled career plan, which is like, I'm just gonna work really hard and seize the opportunities that come to me, and then just trust that God works out the rest. So I'm really bad at that question, like, what are you gonna do in 10 years from now? Because I'm like, I don't know. Because I really have no concept. I couldn't have imagined 10 years ago that I would be where I am today. Largely figured it would be on this trajectory in some way, of the fact that I knew I'd found the right niche for me in working in nonprofits. I knew really when I was a student at Trinity and kind of near the end of my undergrad career, I knew that that was the general direction I wanted to go. I felt really passionate about social justice issues and about social services, and I knew that I wanted to work in that in some administrative capacity, because that kind of met my own gifts, and it was this place where I felt like I had something to offer the world in that space. What I was really good at, what I was interested in, and where there was some really deep need in the world, and finding that nexus, I think, is a really important thing in your career. And so I knew that was the general direction that I wanted to go, but I had no concept of where that was going to take me long term. It was about trying to figure out, where do I get a job to pay back these student loans? and how does that maybe gonna set me up for some things down the road too, but I didn't know what that was gonna look like yet. And so it's been this faith-filled career plan of like, all I can do is pray really hard that God gives me good opportunities and sends me in the direction that he wants me to go. And then I can work really hard where I'm at, and I can say yes to opportunities along the way. And that in its sum is my career plan. And really, that's what I plan to continue to do for the rest of my life. So I feel like I've been really blessed with some great opportunities at really good moments. And sometimes they're not at moments when you think they're coming. Sometimes it's not like I'm looking for those moments. It's just, oh, here it is. This is where you're meant to do next. With each of those, job changes, for example, it's been very clear to me that was like, well, that's very clear, like that's what God wants me to do next. That's the right next moment. Part of that's just a sense that you get after you pray through something and you look at all your options and you're like, yep, this is it. If you think back to, when you chose a college, some of you probably had a sense of like, oh, Trinity, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be, right? Like this just feels right. There's something about that. When, the Holy Spirit in you that just kind of works its way to say, yeah, this is it. This is where you're supposed to be. And I felt that with every job. I also felt very much like, oh, that's what I was being prepared to do next. I transitioned to being the CEO at New Moms, where I am now, which is a nonprofit in Chicago that works with homeless and at-risk teenage parents. And I don't know that I'm particularly good with teenagers. I'm actually a little scared of teenagers, largely, let me be honest. But I love the work of New Moms. I love the mission of New Moms. And there's so many things about the organization right now that were so clearly like, oh, this is where God wanted me next. Both that I'm the kind of leader that they need at this moment to take them to the next chapter, but also that it's the right place for me to plug in my gifts and skills. And what God has been preparing me for. And I think when you're trying to live in God's will, he'll like guide you to those places and give you the right opportunities to seize in those moments. So I think the learning to say no part, which is a perpetual struggle for everybody because you're going to have more opportunities in life than you can ever say yes to, has been a learning journey for me. I would say even just in the last year or so, I've gotten a little better at being like, okay, I have to take that away from my life so that I can use that energy in different places. And I think that's a maturing process for me. But I also think there's this huge lack of courage sometimes, or hesitancy in our behalves to say yes to things. And it's only if you say yes in those moments that you really can seize these great opportunities that God has ahead for you. It's, you know, we ask God to send us, you know, in the Bible we say, "Here I am, God, send me." I feel like if you say that, and many of us have uttered that prayer at some point, "Okay, God, send me." Like, yep, that's my prayer. The thing is, if you say that, then you have to be willing to say, "Okay, I'll go." When he says, "Okay, here, go over here," you have to be willing to say, "Okay, I'll do it," even though you're like, "Wait, that doesn't make any sense." I mean, I ran a legal aid organization. I'm not an attorney. In fact, sometimes I find attorneys to be really difficult to deal with. You know, I was like, no way, I don't want to do this, you know. But I was absolutely meant to do that job at that moment in time. It was such a great thing. Had no idea of that, really walking into that. I just knew that that's where God was saying, go here, do this. And then you have to just walk out in faith. And sometimes that is a day-by-day process where you wake up every day and you go, okay, God, I don't know why you have sent me here or why this is what I'm supposed to do, but I know this is where I am, so I'm going to trust that you're going to give me what I need today to get through this job. And then I'll deal with tomorrow. I mean, it's a real act of faith in a faith journey. And sometimes seizing those opportunities feel really scary like that. And that's what you're going to have to do is every day pray that prayer of, okay, God, I will wake up tomorrow and I will go there and I'm going to trust that you're going to give me what I need to do that, because it feels bigger than me. It feels overwhelming. It feels like things I'm not capable of yet, but I am going to go do that. And I'm going to trust that you're going to be there. And, you know, he's not let me down yet. So
yeah, great. You alluded to leaders are born, leaders are made, that big debate. You spent a lot of money preparing yourself to be a leader when you pursued your PhD, so I'm guessing you might think they can be made. But could you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. Yes, it would be really sad if I spent all that time and decided, like, oops, it's just what you're born with. No, I think leaders can be made. I think there are personality characteristics that you can be born with that might incline you to be a leader in some ways, but anybody can and does serve in leadership capacities. And then there's people who spend a little more time thinking about it and preparing themselves in ways that can really help excel them in those positions, I think. But if you look at leadership theory about the things that, you know, look at all the research that's looked at leaders across time, what makes great leaders, what makes people really successful in leadership roles around, like, you know, casting a vision and getting people mobilized around that and encouraged and making great progress in ways. All of that, there's a couple characteristics that anybody can have. So whether you're introverted or extroverted doesn't really matter, actually. Like, you can be a really quiet person that's very introverted, and that's not going to actually matter. You know, there's great leaders who are like that. The things that do matter are things like if you're adaptable and open to change, if you are conscientious. There's some personality characteristics like that that tend to play more, but anybody can have those or develop those skills over time. And so I think people can become great leaders or even better leaders than where you are today, but and there's lots of ways that you can, you know, further that in yourself. But often the biggest gap is that we just don't pay attention to it. And that's a process for me of paying attention to it. You know, studying it, so I got a PhD, that helps me to spend a lot of time thinking about it, right? So that helps. But I still have to think about it on a daily basis, like, oh, am I leading the team in that way? Am I doing the right thing here? Do I need to provide more context around this? Like, have I made the vision clear yet for folks of where we're going? What do I need to do to get people really encouraged around this and help move them in that direction? And I mean, those are constant things that you think about, whether you're leading a group project, you know, in school, or whether you're leading a big organization.
Yeah, those are big questions.
They're huge.
Yeah. You're now transitioning, and well, you have transitioned as CEO, New Moms, and moved kind of from Donors Forum, more of a corporate nonprofit setting, to an agency setting. And what's that transition been like?
Oh, fun. Yeah, I made a transition a couple months ago to take over at New Moms, and it's been really fun to be back in a community-based nonprofit organization. So, you know, my career's always been in nonprofits, but it's been really fun to be back in an organization that's doing work in the community. And there's something really neat about that. So in my previous position, I was at Donors Forum, which is the Illinois State Association of Nonprofits and Grant Makers, and so I was doing a lot of work with nonprofits and funders around the state, bringing folks together around big collaboration issues and kind of big policy issues that impact nonprofits. And so great work, and it gave me this really great 30,000-foot view of what's happening in the nonprofit sector, which is a pretty significant portion of our economy, and it's about 10% of the workforce and economic impact here in Illinois, so it's a fairly big sector. So it was this really great 30,000-foot view, and now I'm like really back in this community agency where you're like in the daily struggle to raise money to support your work, and you're, you know, dealing with challenges of providing direct service to people. So we provide supportive housing, we have a workforce training program, we have a social enterprise called Bright Endeavors, that's a job training program, and basically a production site that makes products that we sell. And so there's all kinds of new challenges. And it's been a really fun transition because I've gotten to challenge myself with learning some new things in this role. And also it's really great to be back in the work that's happening in the community. There's a lot more struggle. It's a lot harder work in a lot of ways. But it's also really meaningful work too.
Yeah. What keeps you up at night?
Money.
Oh. Asking for it, getting
it? Yeah, I mean, money is a perpetual, there's never enough resources, right? There's so much good that's out there that can be done in this world. We have solutions for a lot of the problems, or we know how to get to those solutions. We know how to work with folks. And so we're working with, you know, teenagers who are parents, who are living in deep poverty, who have nowhere else to go, who are facing a host of barriers, and we have this like one moment in time to work with them and their children before they are completely engulfed in the cycle of poverty, before they have all these other hosts of issues that are going to come around them potentially in their life, of substance abuse or mental health or all these other things. There's this like one moment of amazing time where you can like work with them and try to help change the course of their life and their child's life and break a cycle of poverty. That's awesome, right? That's this awesome opportunity to change lots of lives and a ripple effect from that. And there's never enough money to do it. I mean, there's a huge need for this, and you know, we can only do our drop in the bucket over here on, you know, in the Austin neighborhood in Chicago, and we could serve tens of thousands more in the city because there's a need for that. And any other social service agency would tell you the same thing about how they can impact and make change in the lives of people and the great ripple effect that that has in society as a whole. But you know, the constant challenge or the other side of that equation is that you have to raise the resources to do that. So as a nonprofit leader, you're constantly trying to create the right partnerships and raise the resources that you need in order to fund the work that you can do really well. And so money is what keeps me up because I wish we had more of it. I'm constantly thinking, how do you do this? How do you get that equation right? Because it's running a nonprofit is about sustainability, and it's about having the financial resources and having an impact. And both those things matter tremendously to your organization surviving and really thriving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to circle back to something you said about having the time to think. So I know the chaos sometimes in your life, and how do you schedule that time or make that time for Sabbath, for rest, for even that reflective time to think about how am I leading and what do I need to do differently?
Mm-hmm. It is hard, and I am a fast-paced person. Mackenzie knows me personally, so she knows I'm like kind of constantly going and fueled by caffeine at all times, and so that can be a challenge. And that's been a growth point for me in my life too, of figuring out how to say no to some things or how to pull away and to try to have that Sabbath time. So that's been something I was not good at, even 5 years ago, not good at. I spent a lot of years in school and working full time and doing both those things, and I always have had like 2 jobs at once. I don't know, like it's I just like have trouble saying no to things, and so I'm like, oh, that's a good thing, I should do that too, and so I can like pile it on in that way. And there's great things about that, but I've learned this need to say no to some things. And I think a couple of things have helped me with that. One is, I think, being really intentional in the mornings of starting my day with prayer and being really intentional about being centered when I start. And if I don't do that, I can tell you I'm off for the rest of the day. Like, there's just something a little bit off about that. But it can be just a few moments at the beginning of the day of being like, what's ahead? What are my goals for today? What do I need to do? And asking God to be in the center of that and to guide that process. It's also intentionally pulling away in my life for times of refreshment. I can go really hard for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, but then I need a weekend, or I need a vacation, or, you know, I think building things into the course of my life that help me to really relax and enjoy that. And being willing to say no to some things. I mean, now on the weekends, I take at least a day where I say, okay, I'm not actually going to answer my work email, and I'm not going to, you know, there's constantly like things that come up. So, you know, I get text messages and emails and phone calls all the time about things. And there has to be a little time in there where I'm like, unless the place is burning down, I'm not going to respond here. You know, I'm going to take today, and I'm going to be okay with that, and I'm going to go do some other things. And so I think, but that's taken self-discipline for me. You know, the challenges of our world today is that you're accessed anytime, and that's awesome in lots of ways, right? But when I'm in Spain, I really don't want to answer that question about like a budgetary issue, you know, but I can get it on my phone, like as a text message. I'm like, I'm half a world away. How did this happen, you know? So there's awesome things about that, but there's also like things that you have to then impose some self-barriers around, and you have to just get good at saying, I'm actually going to take tonight, and I'm not going to look at my email, and I'm going to instead go out for dinner with my friends, and I'm going to enjoy this time. Or, you know, Sunday mornings are sacred time that I'm going to be at church, and I'm going to do this with my family. And so, you know, nobody messes with that, and that takes intentional barriers. And it sounds so simple, like, wow, of course, why wouldn't you do that? But I feel like work can consume you, and as you move into your professional lives, it will consume you in lots of ways. And I don't think we're ever going to go back to a society in which you only work 9 to 5, because we have technology and we have just a changing pace of work in our world, and access to information. But then I think the conversation has to switch from balance to integration. Like, how do you integrate it into your life in a way that's productive for you, but that's also healthy in some context?
Yeah. And why do you feel bad when you don't respond to that
Yeah,
email?
because I do.
Right?
I do feel bad. Sometimes it's like a futile act, because I'm like, I'm not responding to email, and then I'm just sitting there crafting the email in my head instead of, you know.
Yeah. It's taking a true Sabbath and rest from it. Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. Who are some of the leaders you look up to?
Oh, you know, I've had some really great personal friends and folks that I've worked for or worked with in the field that are amazing mentors. I had a great boss a number of years ago who has continued to be this like fantastic voice in the nonprofit sector, and so he's had this great career, but he's also just become this really close friend who is a tremendous resource for me. Rob Acton is now at the Taproot Foundation. Kathleen Enright, who runs Grantmakers for Effective Organizations, a big national organization, has been this fantastic mentor to me. She writes and does a lot of work around leadership in the nonprofit and sector and philanthropy as well. I've had really good introductions to people, which has been really helpful, because people tend, if you're a helpful person, people tend to be helpful to you. And I've had people who've taken an interest in me and said, oh, you should talk to such and such, who have then gone on to become these great mentors or folks in my life. And I think there's a lot we can learn from public figures. I mean, I think there's great leaders that are out there. You mentioned the Lean In book. I think there's a, you know, that's a book chock full about like women in leadership, and there's all these examples in there, and there's all kinds of stuff that you can learn, male or female, from leaders that are out there in the public spectrum or sphere. But I also feel like the things that are most impactful to me are people that I've known, that I've worked with. And I have a lot of friends. I've got friends and colleagues who I'm like, I really admire characteristics about them that I learned from. And I think having that support group of peers can be a really healthy thing too, to have colleagues. I mean, Mackenzie falls into this category for me, and we both have a number of friends where I think those are those conversations that you have that are really supportive for you and you know, helpful.
Yeah, kind of that building relationships and that networking, I think is key. How do you sustain those relationships? Are there any tricks or things that you'd recommend?
It's hard work. That's a really good question, because it's hard work. So I've been working with this group from the business class, and we talked about this. So I probably shouldn't say this at Trinity, but I will, because they were joking with me about how I kept saying, well, then, you talk about that stuff over drinks. And they kept saying, so is drinking a key part of this? It can be coffee. It doesn't have to be alcohol. But there is something to that concept. They were like, so our takeaway here is, but the idea of that having those networks and those relationships, and you have to find ways to build those into your life, right? Like, because you could just sit in your office all day, whatever your job is, and do your job. But the reality is your work is enhanced by, and your life is enhanced by, having relationships with other people. And that happens when you are intentional about building those relationships and the context for those to flourish in. And so you have to find ways to do that. So whether that's a drink after work or whether that's coffee with somebody, whatever that looks like, I'm constantly meeting people. And part of that's for work. I mean, part of that's my job, is to be out there and to be the face of the organization. And so I have, I can have 6 coffee dates in one day sometimes. But part of it is just a personal thing as well, too, of building those relationships. And it doesn't happen unless you put the work into it. And so it does require building those networks. And I think people are hungry for that. They're hungry for connection and relationship. And so if you reach out, people respond to that. And that's an interesting thing that you can do initially in your career and start off that way, because I think sometimes people don't do that, and then it becomes really much more challenging later on in life. So when you leave college and you suddenly are in this professional context, I think one of the best things you can do is get this like support group kind of idea of people around you, other people who are going through those same career transitions at the same time as you. And that's been really powerful for me, has been to have another group of women around me who are going through similar career transitions, where we might be doing very different kinds of work, but we're at the same place in life in some ways. And to be that support and the person you call when you're like, okay, what do I do about this? Like, this just happened, with my boss, or I don't know. I mean, I called one of my Trinity classmates the other week, and I'm like, I got an HR issue that I have no idea what to do with, and she's in HR, and she's like, okay. And she kind of talked me through like the 3 things, and I'm like, okay. Because I'm like, what in the world am I supposed to do about this? And who can I call and tell them that I'm leading this organization, and I'm supposed to know how to deal with this, and I don't, right? I mean, there's like this like saving face thing there, but I had no idea what to do. And I needed a person that I could trust and call and be like, help me out here, And so I think the way you develop those resources is to nurture those relationships over time too.
Yeah, great. I think I want to transition, because I think the audience does have some questions for us, and so if we can give a little time for that.
Yeah.
How do you feel that leadership leaders in the nonprofit sector?
Sure, that's a great question. So the question was about, does leadership differ between nonprofit and for-profit sector? Largely I think it's the same things. I think being a leader is some of the same core characteristics. To lead an organization successfully, for example, you have to be able to have a vision for what's ahead. You got to be able to mobilize people around that vision. You got to be able to make sure things get done, that they get implemented. You're trying to keep morale up and get a team motivated and encouraged around that work. I mean, those are things that are the same across sectors. There are some funny nuances to nonprofits. I mean, we raise money we're not selling a product or service. Instead, we're, getting people to invest in our work by, donating to us. So there's this some nuances there. They're structured a little differently with a board of directors. And so whereas a lot of, for-profits are private companies. And so there's some differences there within how you work, but I think the same core leadership capacities are similar, and you can go back and forth probably between those. I think to be a good nonprofit leader, you have to understand that context in which you operate and the challenges of that, and how to, fundraising has a lot of similar characteristics to sales, but it's different too. And so you have to be able to kind of play within that and understand that field. But I think it's the same core characteristics that can make great leaders. The benefit for me of being in a nonprofit field is that I've gotten to, in this very tangible way, make my interest in social justice and in service, I get to take that to work every day in a really tangible way. Now, you can have those same interests and get to see them played out another way in for-profit settings too, but I get to like take that passion that I have and put it to work every day, and that's a really cool thing for me.
In addition to that context, I think it was a great question about context, but how do you recognize the different culture organizations might have?
Yes. Oh, that's very true. So organizations have a culture. I mean, you've got a culture at Trinity that you're largely part of, and any organization you go to work for has this unique context. Some are very corporate-y, and it's very buttoned up, and you don't do this, and you do this, and every organization has their own rituals and ways in which people interact and communicate. And I came to New Moms. No, not surprisingly, I'm at an organization of largely female employees, and it is a whole different context. I walked into like a little gathering one of my first days there, and I was like, oh my goodness, these people love food very clearly, and they like have like this whole like rituals around gathering, and like I was like, okay, I just walked into the culture right here, And so part of it's about identifying what is it that is part of the personality of this organization that makes it work, and how do you build a really positive culture in that? And not, because culture can work both ways. It can be really negative and erosive on morale and troublesome, or it can be a really positive, motivating thing that people are like cultish about their place of employment, where they're like, I love this place because it's, I get to bring my whole self here and it's so cool and I buy into this. So part of your job as a leader is to shape a really positive culture that helps to enhance the work of the organization and get that work done.
Yeah. How do you go about changing a culture that's not positive?
Yes, so I think this is always the mental image I always have of a culture. It's like a really big ship that takes a long time to turn, because you can't just like, we're going to start doing all these things and things are going to be different around here, Change is hard. It's hard for people. You have to like show them a new way, show them while you're going to the new way, nudge them in that new way like 20,000 times and slowly push them over there. And it's hard. Change can be hard for us as individuals, and then you try to have collective change. It can be really challenging, and it doesn't happen quickly. And so it's a lot of intentional moves. It's a lot of over communication. It's a lot of nudging and helping people to move into space where they're uncomfortable. And that's, your job as a leader is to say there's a different way. You may not have thought about it yet, but here's where we're going to go. Let me show you how we're going to go there. Here's the path. Here's the journey we're going to take. And I'm going to keep pushing us in this direction. Slowly, slowly, slowly over time, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't want to do it anymore, we're going to keep pushing through that. And eventually people get there. But it's really easy as a leader to let up when it gets uncomfortable. Because you're like, this is too much work. I got people complaining. People don't like this. They're frustrated. We're hitting barriers. It's challenging. It's too much work. It's easy to let up. And that's where we fall apart. And if we don't let up, if we can keep pushing in those directions slowly, carefully, then it can start to change. But I think it takes 18 months to change a culture in an organization, because it's a really slow process, especially in a massive, massive organization.
Yeah. Great. Other questions?
You mentioned how being active in movement has like its benefits and also its constraints. What about the nutrition? What has been difficult fixing the Christianity? What is the conflict there?
Sure. I haven't had huge difficulties with that. There's certainly context in which I can maybe be more open about that, or I can be more expressive about that. The organization that I run now is a faith-based organization, so I can be a lot more open about that in some contexts. I've always felt it to be a benefit to me, in part because of what I said earlier, that if you didn't have like the divine on your side in this work, I can't imagine how you would survive at times. If I didn't trust that, ultimately God was in control of and would provide for New Moms long term, it'd be really hard in moments of challenge to think, like, how are we going to get through some of these situations? Or if I didn't have that to turn to for moments of strength or wisdom, for just God trying to guide me and feeling like, okay, ultimately he's in control here of this, that would be really challenging. So I think it's a benefit in that way, There's been moments where I felt like it would be an unwelcome thing in some contexts, or an unwelcome thing to talk about. But I haven't had a really negative experience with that. I've always felt like it was a personal thing. And I also feel like in moments when I'm interacting in places where that's not part of the conversation, or there's an opportunity to talk about that in ways, I think, I view the fact that I'm an evangelical Christian as an opportunity to have that conversation in really unique context, in which sometimes that would not be welcome. Where there might be a view of evangelical Christianity, or of all Christians, or negative context. And I think that it's a chance to show that, Christians can have a really great heart for this work that we're doing, and that our faith background and who we are as Christians actually really supports this work that, for example, that I'm doing in social services. And that's an opportunity to be that very quiet witness in that. And so I've found that there's times to be able to have that. I'm not this, the stereotype of this like crazy right-wing Christian, and like that's not me. And I'm a different breed of that, and I can be who I am in those contexts and expect respect for that, like I respect anyone else. And I've felt like that's been a really kind of powerful and quiet witness in some situations, where I don't know if that would have been otherwise.
So both CGLA and New Moms have a faith-inspired or faith commitment. How does that resonate with donors, funders?
Yeah, it's the greatest blessing and the biggest challenge. It's the greatest blessing because there's this great group of course, Christians who believe in this work and believe in the philosophy behind it and believe in the biblical mandate to care for the poor and to be part of this work that's happening, and so that's awesome. And then I have funders who are like, please don't talk about that part of your mission. Like, I will give you money for this work, but please don't tell me about that because I don't want to know. Like, I don't get it. I don't care about it. And my philosophy is we can all be part of this work together. And so that's fine. If you don't want to, this is who we are. We're going to be true to our mission. This is who we are. This is our context. If you want to be part of it because of that, awesome. If not, that's fine too. But here's who we are as an organization. But I think that's a real challenge for leaders of organizations like that, because you have to navigate in a very secular context your faith-based work. And so there's some nuances to how you communicate about yourself, and how you target those communications, and how you navigate donor relationships, and how you approach things. And so that's a constant, there's a continuum, and I'm constantly trying to keep both parts of the continuum in line.
Yeah. And some faith-based organizations have, with government contracts or things like that, have really had to say, no, this is who we are to our mission, and that's not work that we can continue to do because it's not faithful to who we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of government funding, and they're very clear about this is who New Moms is, and this is what their money goes to support at New Moms, and what it doesn't go to support. And so, those are conversations that you have, and there's constantly ethical dilemmas or conversations that come into play at those decision points too.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask one question in closing? Sure. Laura, if you had one message that you really wanted to hammer home with this audience as a closure, what would it be?
Well, I think it would be my faith-based career plan, which is not like brilliant and probably very sexy as a career plan, but I think it would be the thing that has served me the best in life, which I hope might serve you well too, which is to work really hard and seize the opportunities that are ahead of you, and then trust that God takes care of the rest.